Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Seeing as it is the fall season, I wanted to make a little painting kind of relating to that, and I also missed Halloween week, so I do apologize for that. So here is this little raven painting that I am going to be kind of walking through the steps of. If you want to see a longer tutorial of this, then you can head over to my Patreon where I will have that available. So I've already gone ahead and done the background. This was actually part of a little sort of trilogy, if you like, of little ravens like this. So the backgrounds are already done, really simple and easy. I just used a mixture of different browns and white and used a palette knife to kind of spread the paint around to give myself an interesting background that would contrast the blackness of the raven. So I'm first going to be starting out with a sort of a larger brush here, not too big because this is a smaller sized painting, and I'm going to start blotting in the basic value layer of my raven. And I'm starting with my darkest layer here, where I'm using a mixture of my dark colors such as a brown, blue, and a violet. It looks more blue in this lighting here. And I try and avoid using black when it comes to ravens because I want to give the raven a little more depth, so that's why I use that mixture of colors instead. Then I'm mixing a tiny bit of white into the mix to make a sort of mid-grey tone, and I'm filling in the areas that wouldn't necessarily be completely dark but are a little more highlighted. And then of course I would go in with even more white into the mixture and fill in sort of the lighter areas on the raven. I typically have a 4-step process in all of my paintings, starting with the base layer or the value layer, then sort of a rough layer on top of that, then glazing, and then details. And that's pretty much the pattern that I use for all of my paintings. Every single one, whether I'm painting animals, landscapes, people, etc., etc. That's just typically the easiest way to go about creating a nice realistic look. So there I'm adding in that lighter value layer. And I'm really thinking about where the light is coming from. So as you can see, the direction in which the raven is looking is where the light is sort of coming from. So I wanted to give that illusion. So now I'm going in with a dry brush and I'm just softening some of those paint strokes a bit so they're not so harsh. And then of course I will pretty much go back and forth between my darks and lights to build up that value. Going in with the darks again, making sure I don't lose any defined areas on the raven's body. But also take into consideration where the light is going to be hitting the raven. Now with the wings, wings can be a little tricky to do because obviously the variation in feathers, and I also wanted this raven to be a little more kind of looser. I only painted the upper half of the raven and I drip some paint down the canvas at the end to kind of give it a bit more of a something to sit the raven into the painting. Now I'm taking a rake brush and I'm going in with that light grey and I'm starting to add that rough layer of just rough details, nothing too significant here, just to give some texture that looks a bit more refined, but it's still really rough. Now you're going to notice that the raven is probably a little washed out looking. Don't worry if you lose the colour or anything like that, because the glazing step is so helpful in returning that colour. I'm using my big brush again, and you want to make sure that the layer beneath the glaze is completely dry before you move on. Otherwise, you're just going to get the colors mixing and muddying, and it's not going to look good, and you're going to lose any of that rough texture you had before. So glazing is just a simple technique where you are tinting color over the top. And it's really useful for getting that color back in there. I'm just using a black to tint some dark color over it, just so we get that deep richness that ravens have, and have that blue showing through from the paint in the layers below. and I pretty much covered the entire raven with it. I also went in with a purple tint to give some nice depth and have a bit of reflective colours coming off the raven itself. And you can choose where to focus your glazing, because glaze does dry pretty fast. You have to work kind of quickly with it, otherwise it might get a little patchy. But then again, it really doesn't matter too much, because again, we're going to go over it with our rake brush and start to add in those finer little details. Really paying attention to how the body or how the raven and his feathers are going to flow together, where certain places are pointing, and how the fur or the feathers will clump. And you can pretty much repeat this process or go back and forth between rough layers, glazing, highlighting as many times as you need to until you're pretty much satisfied with the look. Adding in some pure white here and there just to highlight some of the brightest areas. And you'll see me using my finger to really help smudge things out a bit. I find that using my finger to blend sometimes is just one of the best tools, because it just gives a more natural look to the blending. Going in with some pure white and a rake brush to add in some bright areas on the raven itself. And then filling in any areas that I may have made too bright. Again, being an artist is about being able to kind of alter things as you go. I see so many artists try and copy everything exactly, and that's just not necessary. You can alter and change things to suit what the painting requires. And I see so many artists trying to be perfectionists with a photograph, and it's just, if you're doing hyperrealism, I'd understand, but it's not necessary in a lot of paintings. Adding in a few more of the highlights. And you'll notice I went back in with a glazing layer, so it really brings out the darkness in those shaded areas of the body. And I'm also going back in with my dark value layer to add some little wispy bits coming out of the raven on the side of his body, as well as deepen up some of those shadows. Now I am taking a detail brush, and I'm actually going to be taking a purple color, violet, and filling in the eye completely with this. Again, I didn't want to use straight up black with this raven painting, because ravens actually reflect a lot of colors. If you look at their photos, they do reflect blues, purples, greens, browns, sometimes a few other things as well. Same for the eyes. I didn't want to just put black in there and, try and make something of that. I wanted to have a bit of color in there, so I put some purple in. Waited for that to somewhat dry, and whilst the paint was still semi-wet, I put some of that greyish tone that we used at the start and kind of added some dull highlights to give it depth in the eye, like it's a little more reflective. And then wait for those layers to dry, do some final details around the raven, making a few little tops here and there, some brighter highlights where the highlight should be, especially around the face, making it look like it's curved as it should be, and a few little wispies on the raven's little snoot. Don't forget to sort of line your raven's eyes as well. I also added a little sort of grey rim or sort of an eyelid around the eye. And then finally adding some bright highlights to the eye itself, and also the eyelid to make it look like it's wet, which eyelids are typically. And that was pretty much the raven done. I added a few more little details here and there, and I also decided to add some drips from the raven itself going down the canvas, just to help seat him in the actual canvas itself, because I was only doing pretty much half of his body for this particular painting. Just defining his little snoot. The actual difference between a raven and a crow are very subtle, but ravens, as you can see on the painting here, have this little fuzz or fur on their beak, and crows do not. Also some minor differences with like their tail feathers, and also ravens are supposedly bigger, so just minor differences. Here I'm just dripping down some of that blue dark value paint that we were using earlier, just to help give it something that he's seated in, so it wouldn't look so odd that he was just kind of there floating. And that is pretty much our raven painting. As I said before, if you want a longer, slowed down version of this tutorial, then you can head over to my Patreon page, where I have a lot more exclusive content, as well as this little video. If you enjoyed the video and want more tutorials like this, then don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and maybe subscribe as well. I just want to thank you all for sticking around to the end. Prints of this little guy, as well as the little trilogy of ravens, should be up in my shops soon, so do check that out if you would like to look at those. Also, don't forget to check out my Instagram and Facebook and all of that stuff that everybody loves. And I will see you all next time then. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving and fall, and I am just super pumped for Christmas, so we'll see you soon.